My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. I'm starting a little series here where we are going to meet with a number of graduate students from both here in North America and from other parts of the world as well. And I just want to talk to them about how they get to this point in their career and talk to them a little bit about their graduate programs and their research. Maybe some advice they might have for people who are considering getting into this field and going to graduate school. And so our first student guest is Stephanie Agnew. She is a master's of science student in the Department of Biology at the University of Ottawa in Canada. And I'm excited to talk to her today. So Stephanie, welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. So I like to start all my episodes, and we're going to start these student episodes the same way. I like to understand how people originally got into the concept of snakes. For most people in the world, it's a very out of the box thing. And so I just kind of want to hear your origin story when it came to snakes. Is something that started as a child, something that happened more recently? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's funny, for something that's become such a big part of my life, I can't really pinpoint an exact moment where I really got into snakes. It's definitely something that's been a big interest of mine since I was young. But when I was really young, I had a real obsession with big cats. And I can't really say when it transitioned to really having an interest in reptiles and snakes specifically. But like my dad likes to go fishing, and like he'd take me out when I was younger and things like that. And like if he'd see a snake or something, he'd pick it up and show it to me. So I never really had a fear of snakes that a lot of people seem to grow up with. And then, I don't know, I mean, they're just such cool animals. And I think I found them so charismatic that I think I just sort of attached to them from there. And after that, I really just started to learn as much as I could about them. And then I started doing research on them, and I chose that path just because I love them so much.
Yeah, well, that's great. And it's really amazing that, you had a father who, kind of fostered that, or at least didn't instill a fear in you. I think a lot of young people end up getting taught by their elders that snakes are a bad thing and a thing to be feared, a thing to be killed, whatever it might be. So that's really great. It's also interesting that you were really into big cats. So the organization that I run is called the Orianne Society, but we were founded, at the beginning, we had like a sister organization, and two organizations were founded by the same person. The other organization is Panthera, which you may have heard of, but they do big cat conservation all around the world. So
that's awesome.
But yeah. So did you grow up in Canada?
Yeah, I did. I'm from Waterloo, Ontario, which is about an hour west of Toronto. So I grew up in Ontario. We have not necessarily the same diversity of snakes that you can find in the US, but we've got, garter snakes, red bellies, water snakes, sort of the ones that you can find around, not the perhaps most exotic of your snake species, but I like them, and I'm used to them, and those are the ones that I've really, that sparked my interest in my love for snakes. So
I've done a lot of work in northern latitudes, not necessarily in Canada, although I did live in Canada briefly. But one thing I always found, diversity was lower, but at the same time, the abundance of animals that you could find in particular places could be quite high, which I just
absolutely
was really great.
Yeah, so, especially especially in Southern Ontario, we've got some real hot spots in terms of just general animal biodiversity, such as like Peely Point, Peely Island, like birds from all over the world come and migrate there and things like that. And it's, if you ever get a chance, if you haven't visited, it's a beautiful place to visit.
Gotcha. Well, so you grew up in, spending a lot of time in nature. It sounds like fishing and experiencing wildlife, and you had this love of cats and kind of get this appreciation for snakes and probably other wildlife. So you're finishing high school and you're going to go off to university. Did you know right away when you went to university that I wanted to do something to work with wildlife, or was it something you kind of figured out a little bit later in your education?
I think I always wanted to do something with animals. When I was younger, I wanted to be a vet, but as I got older, that sort of molded into an interest in working with wildlife in particular, and more as a research aspect rather than like a veterinary aspect. So when I was graduating high school and I was thinking about university, I knew I wanted to do a graduate degree after my undergrad and do some sort of research on wildlife, probably on reptiles. But for when I started into my undergrad, I was mostly just thinking about, getting that good basis and seeing where things led from there. So.
Gotcha. And did you go to University of Ottawa for your undergraduate as well?
I didn't, actually. I went to Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So a bit far from home, coming further or closer back to home for my graduate degree. But I chose to go to Dalhousie. They have a very good biology program there, like specifically a marine biology program. They're right on the ocean, though my interests weren't necessarily in marine biology, but I had visited Nova Scotia with my family as like a family vacation several years prior, and I really loved the East Coast. It was a beautiful place, and I liked the campus and everything. And also, like, I acknowledged about myself that I needed that extra kick out the door to be far enough away from my parents that I couldn't depend on them and like go home and do laundry on the weekends and things like that. So it was also more of like a decision for personal growth outside of educational growth as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. Maybe kind of along those lines of advice, like not and probably different people need different things, but
absolutely.
But that concept, like, do you go far away or do you stay close? Do you need that kind of family lifeline and those connections, or do you need some of that time to grow individually? It's interesting. There's not a right or a wrong answer, but it's definitely something I think people should consider as they go to university. So
for sure.
Well, so you're doing your undergraduate in Halifax and in Nova Scotia, and you. I'm assuming you're doing a biology degree, so you're doing all kinds of different, basic to more focused coursework. Was there a time during that? Because you said before you went to graduate school, you were thinking about reptiles. So there's certain like courses that you took, or certain maybe like experiences you had with like faculty or in the field that kind of shaped that?
There's not a lot of reptile research that's done at Dalhousie, but there's a lot of interesting just ecological research in general. And they do a lot on animal behavior. So with my Bachelor of Science, I also graduated with a certificate in animal behavior. So like I really loved animal behavior, and I ended up not doing research on reptiles in my undergrad, but I did research on caterpillars, actually, looking at the oblique banded leaf roller, which is a agricultural pest across North America, but I did a lot of behavioral experiments with them in the lab. So not fieldwork based, but that really sort of cemented my decision to go into graduate school just because I loved science and research to begin with. And then I could sort of, going into a master's degree and having a choice of going to different labs at different universities. I'm not necessarily restricted to Dalhousie like I was for research I was doing in my undergrad, but I could sort of, combine my interest in snakes with my interest in research, and choose a lab or a university that I could really sort of make my own dream project, which is what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. How did so? Again, sticking with your undergrad, so you get the research component, which then allowed you to couple it, like you said, with your interest in reptiles. How about, we're going to talk about your research, and it involves physiology. So we need to get the details on that yet, because we will talk about that. But was there, obviously, if you're just say you're doing research on a snake, there's so many different areas of focus, whether it's physiology or community ecology or evolutionary ecology, whatever it might be. There's just kind of a long list of things you can focus on. So was there, similar question, but relative to the physiology part, were there components of your undergraduate, either courses or research or field experiences you had that, got you interested in physiology, or is that something that came, essentially when you got to your master's program?
Yeah, no, I definitely fostered my interest in physiology in my undergrad. Going into university from high school, my main focuses were still sort of animal behavior. Like I took a lot of animal behavior classes in my early years in my undergrad, because that's what I had gone into with my main interest in. But just through your course requirements, and you have to take a certain number of physiology courses or whatever to satisfy the requirements for a degree in biology. I found myself really enjoying the physiology aspects that directly related to animal behavior. So not necessarily different cellular pathways that cause different reactions and stuff like that, but what direct suborganismal components reflect on behavior and how animals react to different stimuli in their environment and things like that. So my focus on physiology ties back into my interest in animal behavior, and specifically how they interact with each other.
Okay. Interesting. I did my, again, I don't know the exact focus of your research, but we'll get to it. But I did my PhD in a lab where my major advisor was kind of one of the leaders in environmental physiology in snakes, and kind of the beginning of all that. I did a lot of work with garter snakes. So I'm very in tune to snake and garter snake physiology. I actually think that, again, not sure what aspects of physiology you're looking at, but I've always recommended that for snake ecologists, especially for terrestrial reptile ecologists, people really need to at least take an environmental physiology class and really understand thermal ecology and how it influences so many things. And it's such a critical component of again terrestrial snake biology that if you're not understanding that, at least at a course level, no matter what you're studying with a snake, you're missing part of the picture. But anyways, so I was going to kind of do a big advice section at the end, but we've already done a little bit and I want to do more. I think we'll kind of do it as we go. But so let's stick with your undergrad. And, you came in, and most people would be like this. You knew you were interested in biology, you knew you were interested in wildlife, you had some interest in cats, some interest in reptiles. You developed this interest in physiology. is there like a way that, from your perspective and your experiences, you would recommend people going into this field that they would kind of, what they would do in their undergraduate in terms of taking a diversity of courses, or being really focused in their coursework, or how they might engage with undergraduate research or different labs? Any advice that you would give from where you're sitting that could help other people kind of figure out what they want to be doing and how to achieve that while they're an undergraduate?
Yeah, I think it's, at least early in an undergraduate degree, I think it's important to take a broad diversity of courses, because like you never know what is going to catch your interest. Like me, like I didn't think I would, develop an interest in physiology, but I did, just out of the blue. Like I wasn't expecting that to happen, and it's just because of the diversity of courses that I took. But I also think it's important to have an idea of where you want to be going. Like, sure, take a diversity of courses, but as you, move through your degree, narrow it down a little bit, find out what you've liked, what you disliked throughout, maybe your first or second year of university. And then really in your third and fourth year, in your second half of your degree, just really narrow down and try and get that focus of coursework on what you found you really enjoyed. And in terms of like getting into research and things like that, I think it's really important to get involved early. Like, I know there's not necessarily a huge number of options in terms of how you can get involved in research as an undergraduate student, at least in my experience. But like, even just like emailing profs and saying like, hey, is there a way I could volunteer in your lab or something like that, to just get your foot in the door. I feel like that's something that I didn't do in my undergrad. Like, I didn't do undergraduate research until I was doing my honors in my fourth year. But I feel like there were others, like honors students and some earlier undergrad students in my honors lab that did get their foot in the door early. And I think that was really beneficial for them, that I saw in terms of where they were when they were starting compared to where I was when I was starting. So that's something I guess I wish I did in my undergrad. It is sort of really just trying to get your foot in the door in a research aspect early in your undergrad.
Okay. Great advice. So you are finishing your undergrad and you've got these wildlife interests and cats and reptiles, and you've kind of gained this interest in physiology and how it relates to behavior. And then how did you end up getting into your graduate program at the University of Ottawa? And then the system might be a little bit different in Canada than I'm familiar with, although I did go to graduate school briefly in Canada. But how was that transition? How did you end up moving from Nova Scotia back closer to home?
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a quick break and tell you that the Oriane Society is dedicated to protecting some of North America's most at-risk species and their habitats, like eastern indigo snakes in the longleaf savannas, eastern hellbenders in the Appalachian Highlands, and wood turtles in the great northern forests. Healthy ecosystems depend on these incredible animals, but these landscapes and species need our help to survive. If you care about reptiles, amphibians, and the wild places they call home, visit www.oriane.org to learn more about our work and how you can get involved.
I believe nearing the end of my third year of my undergrad, I had already started looking at different labs around Canada at different universities, because at that point I knew I wanted to do a master's degree related to reptiles, preferably snakes, if I could find an opportunity like that. And so my strategy was it was a very in-depth research that I did for looking through different grad programs and different labs at different universities. But like not all grad programs, at least in Canada. I'm not sure how it works in the US, but like a lot of the bigger universities will guarantee a minimum stipend for graduate students. So like you get paid a certain amount either through teaching assistantships or money out of your supervisor's government grants. So we get PIs, principal investigators, get federal grants from the government to do their research. So it's like lab-based, sort of like as a general program. So they don't have to necessarily allocate those funds to like a specific project as long as they're all in the same realm of that they specified in their sort of overall scope of science that they submitted for their grant funding. So like different schools had these different stipends, so you'd get paid a different amount. The cost of living can vary so widely between different cities. And so just before I even looked at the scientific aspect, I looked at the I guess the more practical aspects of like, where do I want to live for the next however many years while I do my graduate school? And is that
where can you live? Where can you afford to live?
Exactly. It's like, sure, like University of Toronto is an excellent school, but I do not want to live in Toronto because I can't afford that. It's not the sort of environment that I'd like and things like that. So even off the bat, I'd ruled out certain schools. But then at the schools that I thought, okay, I think I could live here with the stipend that you're given. I think I can make that work. I looked at every single lab, so every single prof essentially in the Department of Biology at all of these schools. I looked at their research interests. I looked at the projects that their graduate students were doing. And I'm like, does this fit with my interests? And then that pretty quickly narrowed it down because there's, again, not many labs that do research on reptiles. And so, there were a few that I thought could be a good fit for me. And then, at that point, it's like, it's time to reach out to these profs and see, are they taking on grad students? Because some of them don't have, they have enough grad students that they couldn't, they're at capacity essentially in their lab. So they're not taking on grad students. And then others, they do have space for grad students. So you have to email them a lot of the time and ask, say like, I'm Stephanie and, these are my interests, send a CV and your academic transcripts and things like that and see, if you'd be a good fit. So a lot of the times, like there's, of course, like the science aspect, but there's also like the personal aspect. Like, is their supervisory style going to fit for the way that I learn and things like that? So there's a lot of things to consider outside of the actual scientific research component of graduate school and searching for a place to do your degree that are so important, just like in terms of interpersonal aspects and cost of living aspects. And it sometimes feels very overwhelming to sort of balance all of these things, to find, the match that fits best for you when you're thinking of all of these different components in tandem. But I ended up here in Ottawa in Gabriel Blouin-Demers' lab. He does a lot of landscape ecology on reptiles and stuff, which was in my area of interest. And the nice thing about Gabriel's lab is that he encourages students to design their own projects. So, and that was really great for me because essentially it means that you can tailor your project to your specific interests. Because like sometimes in other labs, like they have like a long-term study system, or like they have some specific project that they've already gotten like non-federal but like private grant funding or something like that, and they need a student to complete that work or something like that. But I was really fortunate to be able to just design my own project because it means you can essentially design it exactly how you want it, which is really great in terms of enjoying the process of grad school, because it's hard to be a grad student, and it really helps when you're really invested in what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think that's another important kind of point you make. There's kind of you could broadly classify a lot of graduate projects in our space, if you will, into two categories. One where you come in, like you said, and you have the freedom to develop your own project. And two, you come into a situation where, the professor already has the funding for a particular project or has a long-term system that they're working in, and you've got a little bit of freedom to develop, but it's within that system. And again, there's not a right or a wrong answer there, similar to things we were talking about before. A lot of it depends on your interests and what you want to do. And coming into a well-funded project that already has very explicit questions you're trying to answer might be the right answer for somebody, or like you, coming in and having that freedom to develop your own project. Well, maybe it's not as well funded. You go through that process of designing your program. That might be right for somebody else, and everything in between. So those are all things worth thinking about. And also, I really liked your approach to finding graduate program. It's been a while now for me, but I did the exact same thing, and I actually, and you may have done something similar, but I developed like a database, and I went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of labs at schools across the United States, some in Canada and some in some other countries. And then I developed this database of labs that I was interested in, and I had info in there like what types of things about that lab interested me and the contact info for all these faculty. And then I went through this exhaustive process of reaching out to all these faculty, and not to come down on any faculty members out there, but university faculty are notoriously bad at responding to emails, and you have to imagine that they get bombarded by potential students. So having a little bit of a broad approach and a well-researched approach, and a lab tailored approach as you reach out to each of those, I think is a really important thing. So, and also mention that Gabriel, or is it Gabriel? That's how you pronounce it.
You can pronounce it like, I say Gabriel, but people do also call him like Gabriel, sort of like the French pronunciation, because he is, his first language is French. He is Quebecois.
Yeah. So he's been on the podcast. He did an episode on black rat snakes that I encourage everybody to go back and listen to. But, okay. So you go through this process and you get to the University of Ottawa, and you have the freedom to develop your own research project. Did you come in like on a stipend that was focused on research, or was a stipend focused on teaching?
So the way it works at the University of Ottawa is that if you don't get a student scholarship from, there's provincial and there's federal student scholarships that you have to apply for. And if you do get one of those, the portion of that scholarship will replace your supervisor's contribution out of their research grant to your stipend. And a lot of the times it's enough to also replace a portion of your teaching load. So as graduate students, if we don't have that funding, that's those external scholarships, we're required to be a teaching assistant for a certain number of hours to sort of provide some of that funding for our stipends. So I did not come in with a external scholarship, so I did have to teach, which I actually really enjoy. But other than that, like I'd say, like the general rule of thumb is that like around 10 hours a week would be spent on teaching in the fall and winter semesters, and then you wouldn't teach in the summer semester and focus on research. So like the majority of my time would be spent on my research, regardless of whether or not I had that external funding. It's just the proportion of time spent on research would be slightly different.
Gotcha. So we've already mentioned that you're working on Gartersnake Physiology.
Yes.
So walk us through the process of how you developed your ideas and your research project.
Yeah, it was very difficult. So I didn't start with the project I'm doing in the very beginning. There were at least 2 or 3 just completely different projects that I had come up with first. I can't even remember some of them. It seems it's not really that long ago, but it seems so long ago now. And like I would talk about them with Gabriel and say, I proposed this project to him, and he'd say, that's not feasible within like the scope of a master's degree or something, or like, there's some flaws here that would essentially like make this project not feasible or things like that. So it's sort of a back and forth conversation with Gabriel about what's feasible to do in the time constraints of a master's degree. So 2 years is the general time frame to finish a master's, and then also like what is feasible with the funding that we have, because research can be incredibly expensive to do, and also just like other things like would I be able to have like a field assistant if I'm working in the summer and things like that, and how would that change what I'm able to do with the time and resources that I have. So it was a long process, and I think it took at least a few months to sort of just get down to the project that I'm doing now, minus a few other tweaks that came later, again, because like science is such an iterative process that just back and forth feedback with other people tends to just refine, and you can always continue refining your project, but at some point, it's good enough to go. And you sort of have to make that commitment. But I didn't start with the project that I'm doing now, but I'm glad that I am doing the project that I'm doing now.
Great. So Gartersnake Physiology. So describe a little bit, kind of like, not so much like what you've learned so far, but like more like give us almost like the proposal, like the overview
absolutely.
of what it is that you're doing.
Yeah. So the short version is I'm looking at how urbanization affects the physiology and behavior of garter snakes. And to dive a bit deeper into that, I want to see how urbanization. So the way we do that is like we look at maps in like GIS software, and we calculate the proportion of different land types in the landscape. And then we can choose sites within the landscape. So my study area was around Ottawa. We can choose sites within that landscape that vary in their degree of surrounding urbanization, so that I can sort of test across a gradient of urbanization. So I'd sample snakes from each of these sites to sort of get a gradient of responses to across urbanization as sort of my variable of interest. And what I wanted to look at behavior-wise was their anti-predator behavior. So a behavior that's strongly selected for highly adapted. Garter snakes have multiple anti-predator strategies that they employ. Of course, they musk, which I'm sure anyone who's ever picked up a garter snake has experienced. That is an anti-predator behavior. It's the purpose of that behavior is to deter predators. They gape their mouths, so they open their mouth and just kind of stare at you. It looks a little silly, but that's also an anti-predator behavior. And then, of course, actually attempting to bite or striking is the third sort of anti-predator behavior I was looking at. And I wanted to see how the likelihood of these behaviors being expressed varied across an urbanization gradient. And then for my physiology variables, there's a few that I'm looking at. So I take blood samples from the snakes, and that's where I get the majority of my physiological variables from. I'm looking at the heterophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is a ratio of different white blood cells that is used in a lot of wildlife research, especially in birds, I believe, in migratory birds. And it's used as sort of a measure of chronic stress, because getting into the depths of physiology, there are stress hormones, which cortisol in humans and corticosterone in snakes has downstream effects. So like when their stress hormones are elevated, it changes their immune system after a while. And one of these detectable changes in the immune system is the ratio of these different white blood cells that I'm looking at in the snakes. So that's sort of a measure of chronic stress / immunity. And then the other main physiological variable I'm looking at is plasma lipid metabolites. So plasma is the liquid that your blood is made out of. It's full of different nutrients, different molecules, and I'm focusing on fats, so lipids, and they're the molecules left over after these fats have been metabolized by snakes for energy. So I'm specifically looking at glycerol, which is a proportion or a portion of your fatty acids. And glycerol in snakes is sort of the leftover byproduct after snakes have used like those triglycerides, those fatty acids for energy. And the only time that they ever really metabolize these fatty acids is when they are under nutritional stress. So they generally will not depend on their fat stores for energy, for nutrition, unless they're exhibiting or struggling to sort of get food from their environment otherwise. So in general, I want to see whether snakes in more urban areas show signs of like decreased health or higher or levels, or not levels, but signs of stress, not necessarily in stress hormones, but signs of physiological stress that may also reflect changes in their behavior. So again, I'm sort of interested in that interface between physiology and behavior, because I expect both the environment in terms of the different degree of urbanization across my sites, as well as the differences in individuals' physiology to both have these direct effects on behavior. Hence why I'm sort of measuring urbanization at an environmental level, as well as behavior and physiology at the individual level. So a bit of complex there in terms of all the different things that I'm measuring there and how they all interact with each other. But hopefully I did an okay job explaining that.
Yeah, and so you're doing this in the field. So you got to these various landscapes, and you somehow like challenge a snake and then measure its response in terms of anti-predator, and then you catch it, take some blood, and measure the various things that you just went through, and you're kind of predicting that snakes in more urbanized landscapes would be more stressed. What were you kind of predicting with the anti-predator, that they would display more anti-predator behavior in more urban, or the opposite?
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a break and tell you guys that snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. The Orianne Society works every day to ensure there's a future for these amazing animals. If you care about snakes, wildlife, or wild places, and you like what you've been hearing on the Snake Talk podcast, support us today by donating on our website at www.orianne.org.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about behavior, and specifically anti-predator behavior in relation to urbanization, is that there is no real consensus of how snakes will respond. Like there's research that shows snakes will be, more aggressive in urban areas, but there's also research that says that, snakes will show like a depressed response in urban areas. So it seems to be either, like a a situation-specific thing where different populations will respond differently to urban pressure. So I didn't have any specific predictions because it could essentially go either way, especially like when you incorporate like a learning effect. Like, do snakes habituate to human presence, or do they sensitize to human presence? The same causal mechanism, like urbanization and increased human presence, can cause opposite responses. So I didn't have any specific hypotheses or predictions in terms of how urbanization would affect their behavior. It's more so just I wanted to see, is there a change, any change at all in their behavior? And then once I'm done, analyzing my physiological data, how can that physiology help us sort of tease apart how urbanization is affecting this behavior? Is it affecting it directly? Is it affecting it because their physiology is changing because of urbanization, and that's having an effect on their behavior? So it's a bit of an integrated approach in terms of how all these different mechanisms can cause changes in an animal's behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could even see with the physiology side of it, a snake living in a landscape, an urbanized landscape, where in theory it'd be, it probably actually deals with more predators, lots of invasive kind of like human subsidized predators and on and on. But I could almost imagine even the physiology side where a snake in that environment becomes kind of used to it and is less stressed by it. But I don't know. So how far are you into this research project you're working on?
Yeah, so I started my master's in September of 2024, so a little over a year ago. And I spent the entirety of the past summer, so from around April to into October even. So a nice long field season for Canada, at least. I spent the summer sampling for snakes. So we put down cover boards, so 2 by 2 feet pieces of plywood, and we use those because the snakes like to warm up underneath. So we flip them, and it makes it a bit easier to find the snakes. I've finished all of my sampling and sample collection in terms of the blood samples, and there's no extra steps for the behavior data. Like we get the behavior data in the field, and that's pretty simple. But the physiological data, I haven't quite finished collecting from my blood samples. So the way we look at the heterophil lymphocyte ratios is we make blood smears on microscope slides, and then we stain the smears, and then we look at them under the microscope. So that's what I've been doing essentially for the past several weeks, is looking through the microscope, characterizing all the different blood cells, and then doing that for, I think like 150 blood samples or something like that. So it's taken me quite a while to do that. And then for the lipid metabolites, I'm still deciding on which specific assay I want to do. So we have to purchase the assays from like a chemical company, and they're very expensive. So I want to make sure I get one that will perfectly match what I want to be measuring, and make sure I've got confirmation on that before I spend several $1,000s.
Let's go with the anti-predator. Have you analyzed? You've obviously measured all of those data in the field. Have you analyzed those data yet, or no?
Yeah, I have been able to analyze my behavioral data. And excitingly, there is a detectable change in anti-predator behavior across an urbanization gradient. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I also measured their likelihood to flee before I captured them. So like you flip the cover board, and like if within the first couple seconds, if they attempted to flee, I counted that as a flee. And if they just kind of hung out there under the board, I counted that as not a flee. So I measured that, and then I also measured the number of anti-predator behaviors that they displayed. So the 3 behaviors, the musk, gape, and strike that I mentioned before. So those are my 2 anti-predator metrics. and they both actually decrease over an urbanization gradient. So snakes in urban areas are both less likely to flee and also exhibit fewer anti-predator behaviors after capture, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's going to be really interesting to see those physiology results.
Absolutely.
And see how those line up.
Yeah, for sure.
When are you expecting to get those?
Yeah, I'm hoping to have the blood smear analysis, so the heterophil to lymphocyte ratio, at least all of my smears analyzed before Christmas. So before the end of this month, I should hopefully have all of those analyzed, and then the statistics for analyzing that would hopefully not be too far behind finishing the blood smear analysis. But then the lipid metabolites will probably be a little bit longer because we've got most of the assays need to be kept on dry ice through shipping and then stored in like a minus 80 degrees Celsius freezer until you use them. So we'll have to find the best time to get them shipped because I don't know exactly where they're going to get shipped from. And then also make sure that, my pipetting is good enough to make sure that's accurate enough for the very, very small volumes, like at the 0.001 milliliters and things like that. Make sure my pipetting is good enough for that, so that we are not wasting several $1,000s of money on my poor pipetting skills. So that'll probably be a couple more months, so maybe like February by the time I've got that data collected, and then hopefully again the statistical analysis isn't too far behind that either.
Gotcha. So, so these differences you're seeing across the urban gradient with the anti-predator, where the more urbanized the landscape gets, the less likely, I don't know if likely is the right word, but I'll generalize and use it, the less likely that the snakes are to display anti-predator behavior. I mean, do you have any wild speculation? Do you think they're just getting acclimated to interacting with people and more predators and, what have you?
Yeah, I think it's likely that they may be habituating, they may be getting used to those kinds of stressors. I also think once I've got my physiological data, I might be able to sort of speak a bit more confidently about this. But I think maybe, if they're in lower condition, they may not have those energy resources to flee or to, exhibit all those anti-predator behaviors. Because of course to us, it doesn't seem like that much energy, just slithering away a little bit. But, them being ectotherms, that is costly energy to them. They don't eat very often. They need that thermal energy to sort of function. So that, it doesn't seem costly to us in a physiological sense, but it may be a lot more costly to snakes to sort of exhibit those behaviors. So they may just not have the physiological strength, I guess, to exhibit those behaviors, and may just be a bit riskier in their decision making in saying I don't want to expend. Of course, the snake, I'm anthropomorphizing the snake here, but they may be thinking they don't want to risk spending those resources that they may need later, and that they'll take the risk and sort of sit still, or show a depressed anti-predator response, rather than potentially wasting those resources.
Yeah, interesting. Great. Well, when are you planning to finish your program there?
Yeah, I'm hoping. Yeah, it's sort of coming up a lot faster than I expected. But I think if everything goes the way I'd like it to, which is very unlikely, things go wrong in science all the time, and that's part of it is dealing with failure. But if things go the way I'd like them to, I'd hopefully be writing my thesis and perhaps submitting my thesis, sometime end of spring, start of summer, which would be nice to do if everything goes well. But again, I still have a little bit of extra, technically, like I'm supposed to finish my master's by September. So I have a bit of wiggle room in case things go wrong, that I have a bit extra time to sort of fall back and troubleshoot if things don't go as planned.
Great. Well, you're in the home stretch. So
yeah.
So when you finish this project up, what are your plans, I guess, both kind of near term as well as long term in terms of your career?
Yeah, in the short term, I don't want to do a PhD right away, if at all. So like once I finish my degree, I'd like to try and get a job, at least something hopefully that's relevant to my degree would be nice. But the job prospects for someone with a degree like mine, like an ecology degree or an animal behavior degree, aren't necessarily the greatest. Like there's a lot of options for like biochemistry and like biomedical degrees and things like that. But for my degree specifically, there's not necessarily the same variety and number of jobs available. But I think I'd like to try and get my foot in the door in the workforce. Not that I didn't enjoy my master's. I loved doing my master's, but in terms of job prospects, again, thinking on the practical side of things, the job prospects for a master's student or someone with a master's degree are pretty similar to the job prospects for someone with a PhD. And a lot of the jobs that are available to people with a master's degree would not necessarily want to hire someone with a PhD. So the number of jobs, despite the higher level of achievement of someone with a PhD, the number of jobs that are looking for someone with a PhD are a lot fewer and a lot more, both more competitive and not necessarily they don't necessarily compensate in the way that you'd think someone who has a PhD deserves to be compensated. Of course, there's jobs like being a professor and things like that, but those jobs are so rare, especially to see one pop up in your area of expertise. That of course, when I was starting my my master's, I was thinking like, I think it'd be great to be a professor, but I don't think it's particularly feasible. So like, of course, it would be great, but looking on the practical side of things and looking at what skills I have now and what skills I would gain in a PhD, I think it's at least to try and get a job and see how that goes. I think that's the better option for me personally. Though I know some of my peers are going straight into PhDs and they want to do that, and that's great. But I think for me personally, I think it's a better choice for me to at least try and get my foot in the door in terms of the workforce. Because like I'd like to just do research. Research would be great as a job. I also I learned I really enjoy teaching, which I learned doing my teaching assistantships as a grad student. So even just like not necessarily like a professor teaching job, but just like maybe even just like an instructor or like a lab coordinator or something like that. I think that's something that I would really enjoy outside of research.
Great. Well, yeah, it's interesting. In my career, I'm getting well into it now, but in my career, I've seen, you're talking about professors, like I've seen like a major shift where like the supply and demand equation, like the supply of faculty positions relative to the demand of people with PhDs is way out of whack.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people in herpetology in particular, you finish your master's and you love these animals and it's very hard to get a job,
Absolutely.
We're working in the field, working with the snake. So people are like, well, I can go on and get a PhD and have 4 or 5 more years of working in the field of snake. But then we have just this glut of people who are overqualified. We get people with PhDs applying to like our seasonal technician jobs.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, anyways.
I know. It's the thing is that it's sad, but like reptiles don't have economic value the way that, you know, fish do, or certain mammals do, like deer in terms of hunting and things like that. And so there's just so much less funding either from private industries or as well as just the government, because people don't, unfortunately, they don't care about them as much. Of course, you know, that's where we're the outliers in that sense, that we really do care about these animals. But again, on the practical side of things, on the less, you know, biological side of things, it's just that there's not a lot of funding to support all these people that have such a wonderful interest in these animals like we do.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's true. And I think it's interesting, and you've shown it throughout your time working in this field. You have a very practical way of thinking about things. I think at least good advice for people would be to at least consider that in your decisions instead of just running 100% blind on passion. And so that practical side is really important. So great. Well, I like to have all of my guests tell me a snake story. So Stephanie, what is your best snake story?
Yeah, I've got one that's come to mind. I don't know if you've ever been to the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario. It's about a couple hours sort of northwest of Toronto. It's a provincial park. It's a beautiful provincial park along Georgian Bay. And up there in the sort of Georgian Bay coastline, Bruce Peninsula area is where Ontario has its only venomous snake, the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, in addition to like a very small population down near Windsor. But we'll focus on their bigger population up in the Bruce Peninsula. And I had gone to the Bruce Peninsula to go camping with my mom and one of my brothers. And we were walking along a trail, and I was walking out, you know, maybe like 10, 20 feet in front of my mom and my brother, and, you know, just walking along. And then, you know, you hear that distinctive rattling sound. And of course, there's no other venomous snakes in Ontario, and very few in Canada in general. So maybe this doesn't sound as wonderful to you or your peers who live down in the southeastern United States. But, you know, you hear that distinctive rattling sound. I just stop in my tracks, and I don't see anything, but I stop. And then I just see just a beautiful Massasauga just slither its way across the path. Very polite. You know, he let me know he was there. He's like, it's time for me to cross the trail. And I said, okay, sir. So he crosses the trail and he goes on his merry way. And that was just one of the coolest things ever to see. Like they're like a threatened species here in Canada. And it was just such a cool thing to see one in the wild. The only venomous snake I've ever seen in the wild. And I don't know, that was just such a wonderful experience. Like I'll remember that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, it sounds like a great experience. They're threatened out here. South of the border as well. They're protected under Endangered Species Act. But
I see.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on the Snake Talk Podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I wanted to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.